for Let's Talk with Auntie Gail, where we will discuss what is happening in our constituency and the progress we have made so far. Anou parler et puis Auntie Gail, sous les mardis à sous GVD TV, channel Yon 5. Mikoudnof, we've got this. Let's talk. Nous toutes, c'est Yon famille à Mikoudnof.
I'm not gonna say bye.
Crossfire, discussing the issues. Norbert Williams, Champagne, Dr. Secret, and Ring the Bell. Thursdays, 8 p.m. on Sky FM and GVD TV. Don't you miss it.
Hello, welcome to the program Champagne in the Morning with yours truly, your favorite guy, Champagne. Join me here every morning from 8 a.m. until 12 noon. We're also live on GVD channel 115 and live stream on the internet. Join me as we discuss all of the current events of our beautiful country and around the world. You too could get into the program by calling in 456-0931 or 485-0931. Thank you for tuning in. Join me 8 a.m. to 12 noon.
Bienvenue à sous Sky FM 93.1 et puis Dr. Sigray lundi pour vendredi. Ça c'est 4h30 pour 8h au soir. Côté Dr. Sigray ka encore nous. Côté nous ka discuter qui ça qui ka fait en pays. Nous aussi à sous Facebook et puis channel 115. Ça c'est GVD TV. Join-moi lundi pour vendredi à sous Sky FM 93.1 et puis Dr. Sigray en commun.
Bienvenue à sous Sky FM et puis Ring the Bell 93.1. Limo ici là c'est 456093. Moi ici là tous les jeudis, vendredis, samedi 8h jusqu'à 10h soir. Moi aussi à sous GVD TV et puis Facebook Sky FM, matchez ça et puis Blamicol.
Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me. Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me. Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me.
Good evening, St. Lucia, and welcome to another day of Constituency Vibes. It's Wednesday, and as you can see, once again, this is not Ricky Alexander, but it's Nancy Charles sitting in the hot seat tonight on Constituency Vibes. I'm not too sure which constituency we're going to talk about tonight, but I know tonight we're going to have some vibes going in at Sky FM and GVD TV tonight. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I count it a privilege to be able to reach you in your homes. Maybe some of you are driving down from work, or perhaps some of you are also making your way home. Wherever you are this evening, I pray that the blessings of God will be upon you and upon your family. And I'm hoping tonight that as we sit down and we vibe together, that it will be informative, and everybody who listens to the show tonight would say it was a good thing I tuned in my radio to Sky FM 93.1 and to GVD TV channel 114. So good evening, St. Lucia, and welcome to Constituency Vibes tonight. As you can perhaps see, I do not have a guest tonight. Once again, hopefully the next time we see each other we'll have a guest. But last week you had a guest in terms of Miss Farah Polius, who gave a very good account of herself and the constituency she is intending to represent in terms of Dennery North. Phenomenal woman. I'm already saying congratulations to Miss Farah Polius. I know that you will do a wonderful job as the next parliamentary representative for Dennery North. But tonight, I think it is very important that we talk. And sometimes, St. Lucia, when you want to talk about certain issues, maybe you need to take a little time, sit down with yourself and not have a guest, but to take a little time to explain certain things. So at the end of the day, we can make informed decisions. If it's one thing, I try as much as possible whenever I have an audience is to ensure that I explain to you as much as possible, and to ensure that when we are done speaking and done listening, you would have a better appreciation of the topic at hand, and you can make perhaps a sensible and an informed decision. If you are speaking to someone, you're able to speak on that topic based on the discussion that I have had with you tonight. And so it's a very important topic tonight. If you are listening, perhaps I would appreciate or ask of you to send a little WhatsApp to one of your friends or family members, or send a broadcast message and say, hey, Mrs. Nancy Charles is on Sky FM tonight, and send them that WhatsApp message and tell them, give me an hour of your time tonight. Let's sit down, and tell them, let's listen. It will be very informative. I promise you that. And so tell a friend and tell a friend to tell a friend, and let's pass the word around. Tonight, we're going to speak some very important topic tonight. The topic we will be discussing this evening, it is something that has been discussed and debated by both members of the opposition and members of the population in general. We've had a lot of views being expressed, some of them right, some of them wrong, some of them a bit exaggerated, but at the end of the day, it is something that impacts and affects every single one of us, every single St. Lucian. And so I thought maybe outside of the fact that I don't have a guest, maybe we could have a little talk about it and a discussion about it, and so that all St. Lucians can maybe be more informed. And so tonight we will be talking about money. We will be speaking about income, expenditure, management of money. How do you spend money? We'll be speaking about debt. We'll be speaking about borrowing. And that is something that I think every single St. Lucian can relate to. Money. Whether you have sufficient, whether you don't, how do you stretch it? How do you make ends meet? When you are in need, when you go to a financial institution, what are some of the requirements perhaps the financial institution may have or require of you? And how do you ensure that you are accountable to whatever monies are equated to you? It is the same thing, St. Lucia, with government. It has to do with governance. It has to do with management of your money, of my money. And I think it is important that we all take a moment to perhaps better appreciate and understand the issues and the matter of money. Perhaps I see my technician, they're trying to adjust my camera. I think it's because I'm a little bit shorter than Ricky. So when Ricky is there, Ricky is this, handsome, tall gentleman, and there's very little adjusting that needs to be done. But I am not so tall as Ricky, and so I think there is a need for an adjustment. I'm not too sure they're signaling whether they want to take a short break even before I begin, so that they can readjust and refocus the camera, so perhaps that you can better see me, and also maybe readjust my mic as well. I'm being told that the sound is not too good, so maybe we will go to just one break while they adjust the camera, and we'll come back and talk about our favorite topic, money.
When President Trump lost his son, Joe Biden suspended his campaign.
That's true.
He suspended his campaign for 2 days when President Trump lost his son.
Oh, you lie! You lie!
I have it on the record. Lost his son.
Robert Trump, President Trump's younger brother, has passed away after an illness.
That's all, folks.
And I'm a student at the Monaco Passias Combined School. I'm in grade 6 and my teacher is Miss Stanislaus. My favorite subject would be math. I don't normally like it, but my teacher makes it finds a way to make it fun. I also love the positive quote she put up all over the walls. It reminds me to keep going. Also, the new wing is very impressive. The balcony is very large. So at break time, I can eat my snack and go for a nice little walk. I also like the size of the classroom, so I'm not sticking on anybody because 6 feet apart. Before, it was a rocky ride coming to school when I normally take the bus, but now the drivers don't have any complaints now that the district rep fixed it. Before, it was like a rocky, stony road. But now that they fixed it with some concrete and nice tools, it's a smooth ride. I may even fall asleep. Thank you, Dr. Rigobert.
Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me.
St. Lucia, again, I do apologize for the short break, so that we could adjust our cameras and the microphone to ensure that you can see and that you can hear tonight. Before we took the break, I spoke about money. I said tonight our discussion would be on money. And St. Lucia, a lot has been said about this administration, our management of money, our management essentially of the economy, because that is what drives the economy. It's money, it's the funding, the income, the expenditure, how you spend it, what you invest it in, where you get it from, how much you take when you get it, what is it that you repay in loans, in principal, in interest, etc. This is what accounts for your economy and the movements in your economy. We have heard a lot of criticism from members of the opposition about the financial year 2020. Unfortunately, we did not hear so much factual, so much criticism with reference to the management of the economy in 2019. And lo and behold, we had COVID, and so our economy experienced a downturn. The entire world, as a matter of fact, it's a worldwide economic crisis in terms of COVID, and St. Lucia being part of the world, we also experience that crisis. And then we have been accused, or the administration has been accused of mismanaging the economy, mismanaging the finances of the country, borrowing excessively, etc., etc. And so I thought that it would have been important perhaps to appraise you of where we were in 2019, to give you a better appreciation, and for you to make a determination for yourself as to how well this administration had been managing, or has been managing, the economy from 2016 when we came into office, and all the positives that we've had, the growth, the economic growth that we've had, the new policies, fiscal policies that we have put in place, and how that has helped manage and institute and put in growth in our economy. And you can make that determination for yourself as to whether you would want to judge the administration by 1 year of a global pandemic that has impacted not only St. Lucia but the entire world, and whether you are going to decide that because the pandemic has impacted and affected our country, both financially, it has affected us health-wise, it has affected us in terms of employment. There's no area of our economy that has not felt the impact of COVID-19. Are you honestly going to sit and say, well, just for that 1 year, this pandemic happened? It really wasn't, we didn't call the pandemic on ourselves. We are part of a global system, and it traveled, and everybody has been impacted. And will you judge this administration based on this? So I thought that I would perhaps bring my economic and social review for 2019 that I have there with me. I will read for you some key pieces of information that speaks to the management of the economy by this administration, by the Alan Chasney-led United Workers' Party administration. And then I'm also going to read to you some of the outlook in the economic and social review of 2020. And then you can make a determination, perhaps based on what I will be presenting to you tonight. Feel free to call, no matter who you are or where you're from. If you have a difference of opinion, perhaps you may need some clarity, and then we will talk tonight, we will vibe tonight on money and the management of money. So to begin tonight, I will be reading to you from the Economic and Social Review of 2019. It's not going to be a lot of reading, but I just want to lay the foundation for you so that you understand what is happening. I have to say, by the way, that the Economic and Social Review is used sometimes as a tool of convenience by members opposite at times. So when it speaks to good management, good fiscal policies, and it speaks to economic growth, they sometimes challenge the information and the credibility of the information, but in the case of where it speaks to certain instances where we did not do so well and the economy did not fare well, then there's no challenge of that credibility of that information. But tonight, it is not my role to challenge the credibility of the Economic and Social Review. This is information, actual, truthful information, data collected from various agencies and different sectors in St. Lucia and compiled by a team of competent men and women. They've been doing this for years, and so I will take their word for it. And so on page 24 of the Economic and Social Review 2019, page 24, the Economic and Social Review more or less gives you an outlook of not only the performance of St. Lucia, but it speaks to the performance. It gives you perhaps a brief synopsis of the performance of the entire world. It gives you a synopsis of the performance of the region, and then it breaks it down to St. Lucia in particular. So on page 24, we begin with the summary of our domestic development or our domestic performance. And it says here that during 2019, activity in the domestic economy continued to be influenced by the performance of the tourism sector, the key source of foreign exchange and employment. Preliminary GDP estimates suggest that notwithstanding positive growth, real GDP growth slowed from 2.6% in 2018 to 1.7% in 2019, and GDP growth in 2019 was driven by expansions in tourism, manufacturing, and transport. However, this performance was tempered by declines. We had a decline in wholesale and retail, construction, and agriculture. But it goes on to say that the tourism sector posted another strong performance in 2019, consistent with the growth in international tourism and the rebound experienced by other Caribbean destinations. Total visitor arrivals rose by 4.7% to a historic high of 1.28 million visitors on account of increased external demand supported by improved economic conditions in key source markets and additional airlift. And I want to speak a little bit about the additional airlift because St. Lucia, you would remember, coming in as a government, that was one of the key areas that the government, the administration looked at. Was we knew that in order to ensure that we would get more visitors coming in, it was key that you have additional airlift. And so the Minister of Tourism, combined with our Prime Minister, they embarked on meeting with the airlines, having meetings after meetings, engaging them, selling St. Lucia as a destination to ensure that we have achieve that additional airlift. And so the positive outrun reflected increases in all visitor subcategories with the exception of excursion, which fell by a mere 10%. Stayover arrivals grew for the 7th consecutive year, and it rose by 7.3% in 2019. On page 25, it speaks to increasing activity in the manufacturing sector led to growth of 8.6% in value added from the sector. The value of manufacturing production went up notably by 6.1%, buoyed by expansions particularly in food, beverages, and the chemical subsectors. And also it says, conversely, real GDP growth in agriculture, we had a contraction by 0.8%, and that was predominantly due to a reduction in export in bananas. The low production in the first quarter of bananas was due to the passage of Tropical Storm Kirk in September of 2018. And so you would appreciate that banana being, I think, around a 9-month fruit, the impact of the storm in September of 2018 would have now impacted a few months later how much banana we were able to produce. However, it's interesting to note that while there was a decline in our banana, non-banana crop production estimated to have increased by 5.1%, mainly due to growth in supermarket purchases. In the livestock subsector, total production of chicken and pork also expanded by 5.3%. So St. Lucia, whilst we recognize perhaps that banana is one of the main crops, especially for our export market, we've always been hearing people saying that we're not doing anything in agriculture. What is happening in agriculture? You would recognize that in 2019, we had substantive growth in the non-banana crop sector. And so our fruits and our vegetables, our lettuce and cabbage and cucumbers, tomatoes and perhaps our dashing and sweet potatoes, ripe plantain, which is what everybody loves now. All these non-banana crop items, they grew by 5.1%, and we also saw expansion in our chicken and our pork. I think St. Lucians have become a lot more aware of consuming and buying local, and so you've seen that expansion in our production of chicken, because production goes hand in hand with consumption. You would appreciate that. In keeping with the positive growth in economic activity, particularly in the tourism sector, the average rate of unemployment, and that is a topic that has been hotly debated, St. Lucia. I listened to it again in Parliament just yesterday about unemployment, and I will give you the figures for unemployment a little later in terms of the rate of unemployment when we came into office in 2016, and where unemployment how unemployment went down. But it says, in keeping with the positive growth in economic activity, unemployment rate fell. It went down to 16.8% in 2019, down from 20.2% in 2018. So from 20% to 16%, that's about an average of 4%. Down from 20% to 16.8% in 2018. And it says that youth unemployment also decreased from an average rate of 36.3% in 2018 to 31.6% in 2019. And in 2019, we started feeling the impact of the BPO sector, for example. ITEL was not on the scene as yet. I think late in 2020, ITEL BPO opened the first facility, but you had Ojo Labs, you had increases or expansion with KM2, and you had a few new other BPOs that opened up in the northern area, and all these would have impacted. We also had the NAPS program, the apprenticeship program, where we were able to train a few hundred of our young persons in preparation for the cruise ship sector. And all these activities contributed to the decrease in the rate of youth unemployment from 36.3% to 31.6%. It says here that inflationary pressures were subdued during the review period, influenced by sharp declines in global oil prices and lower imported prices from major trading partners. Inflation was contained by lower cost of electricity, some fuel products, housing, telecommunications, clothing, footwear, and recreation. And so I'm just laying the foundation for you so you understand where we were at and how the economy was performing St. Lucia. Preliminary data indicate the public finances fell in 2019-2020, and I will tell you why. It says that the central government recorded a larger fiscal deficit in 2019 compared to 2018, and it says here the outrun was primarily attributed to continued growth in total expenditure. However, the revenue intake fell relative to 2018-19 owing to lower receipts in the last 2 months of the fiscal year in light of the COVID-19 crisis. So even from 2019 towards the latter end of the financial year of 2019, because that would end in early 2020, you would appreciate that those 2 months had a huge impact on our revenue intake, and that resulted in a deterioration of our finances in St. Lucia. And so as a result, we had a primary balance that moved from a surplus and it moved to a deficit. So we were doing well. We started doing well. There was growth in the manufacturing sector. We saw growth in mostly every area. We saw growth in our agricultural non-banana production sector. We saw growth in our construction activity. There was an increase in construction activity. We saw a rate of unemployment declining, and everything was going nice and dandy as per plan, as per what was some of the things that we really wanted to do and to accomplish. And then lo and behold, towards the end of 2019 going into 2020, the COVID crisis hit us. And then I will go on page 62, which speaks to the overall performance of the government's fiscal operation, and it speaks to revenue performance. Despite the positive performance in the first 10 months, overall revenue collections in 2019-2020, it was dampened comparatively by lower receipts in the last 2 months of the fiscal year, associated with the sharp drop in economic activity due to border closures and scaled down operations induced by the global outbreak of the COVID-19. As a result, total revenue and grants decreased by 0.8% to $1.192 million, or 21.3% of GDP in 2019-2020, following an upward trend over the past 9 years. So we've been experiencing an upward trend, but because of COVID again, it impacted on our revenue performance. And you would appreciate, St. Lucia, that you have less money coming in, but your expenditure has not changed. You still need to pay the bills, you need to pay the water, you need to pay the electricity because you are still consuming. You need to pay your staff, you need to continue life. You have to try and keep life as normal as possible, and obviously there will be an impact in terms of that. And so I also want to look at our sources on our financing in 2019. So in 2019, if we go to page 68 of our economic and social review, where we speak to debt and public debt, we had only $305 million of new financing. And out of that, in terms of loans, and I will tie it back to you a little later, St. Lucia, we had loans of $113.2 million. Now, I want you to remember that number very carefully. $113.2 million of loans as at March 2020, and that is based on our approved budget vis-a-vis our actual budget. I want you to remember that number. And as you remember that number, I want to now take you to our budget, or what we call our budget guide. And I will give you a little bit of information on the budget and how the budget is prepared, etc. And then we will go to the issue of the money, that $113.2 million that I spoke about, and how we will tie it tonight with what I want to bring to your attention with reference to money and budgeting, how do we spend the money, where do we get it from. The preparation of the 2021-2022 budget. Who are the agencies putting the budget together? St. Lucia is the Ministry of Finance, is the primary agency spearheading the budget, but you have collaborations with other public sector agencies, both private sector agencies, statutory bodies during the budget process, and that includes all the various ministries and agencies that are affiliated with the budget. So for this year, how big is the national budget? The national budget is estimated in terms of our revenue section. It is estimated to be $1.119 billion. And that is in revenues and grants. This is what we estimate that we will be collecting in our budget. And just so you understand revenue and the revenue items for that $1.119 billion, I'm not too sure if they can put it up on the screen for you, but tax on income and profits, total for tax on income and profit would be about $218.5 million. Tax on international trade, custom duties, $218.59 million, and the breakdown is on import duty, excise tax, throughput charges, and passenger facility fee. Tax on domestic goods and services, $464.2 million, and non-tax revenue item would be $92.69 million. And so you'd have a total recurrent revenue of $1.001 million. You'll have capital revenue of $6.05, and your total revenue and grants would be $1.1195 million. So that is where your revenue comes from. So in order to run and to manage the country, you need to have income and you need to have expenditure. And so the budget tells you the source of revenue for your income. It tells you where the income is coming from. You have to be able to identify where that income is coming from. And equally, your budget tells you your expenditure. It tells you how much money that you are going to spend in that financial year. And the expenditure for the financial year is $1.639 billion. So obviously, St. Lucia, if you have an expenditure of $1.639 billion, and you have total revenue of $1.119 billion, it means that there is a gap, there is a financing gap. It means that you do not have sufficient revenue to cover your expenditure. And so obviously you have a shortfall, and you need to see, or you need to find out, where and how am I going to cover that shortfall. You have a home, you have a combined income, perhaps you and your spouse, and the combined income, which is what your revenue is going to be, when you measure it against your total expenditure for running the house, taking care of the family, paying the bills, and you look at perhaps some other items you want to do, you need to fix the roof of the house, or you need to put a little expansion on the house. When you tally what the expenditure for that household is going to be, and you look at your total income, you would recognize that you have a shortfall. And so you need $20,000 extra, you need $50,000 extra to be able to cover for that additional expenditure item that you need to undertake in your home. And so you now have to decide, how and where am I going to get that money? I'm telling you all of that because for the last maybe 2, 3, 4 years, there's a term or word in St. Lucia that has been made to seem that it is bad, that this is the first time this is happening. And so every time you hear a word, they want to create some sort of a connotation in your mind that it is something that is wrong that you are doing. And that word is borrowing. I I think I speak good Creole, so I'm going to say that in Creole. Moi vle di setli si that ki presque tout moun ki ka Western St. Lucie sav. Et si lani moun ki pa jeme pou ete l'argent la pa nije. Mais là où ni affaires pour faire, ou ni caillou, ou ni famille, ou ni différents bail pour faire, peut-être vous voulez une petite machine, et bien peut-être vous voulez mettre un petit chambre à kaila, et bien peut-être vous voulez ranger fayette kaila. Là où regardez comme l'argent ou et puis ma ou café et puis ou ni maman là ou ni tout ces bail ça pour faire ou ka ouais ou pas ni assez l'argent puis si ou ni pour servir on l'argent pour faire ou pas ni assez l'argent. So toute manière on y pour garder qui côté ou kay sa joindre l'argent pour prêter. Bon délai ou aller Bank of St. Lucia mais peut-être ou pas qualify pour Bank of St. Lucia. Peut-être ou aller à l'autre banque RBTT et ben ou pas qualify. Et then ou di ou kay aller à credit union et puis credit union a di well ou kay business ou kay business ça ou kay business ça et ben peut-être là ou garder yon se bank là ou kay di interest la bank là ka charge ito ho et puis ça credit union là ka charge il plus bas so ou kay aller ou kay prend loan credit union mais parce que tout ça on y pour faire et puis je sais ici ça d'accord avec ça en disant yon temps et bien dans l'autre on y pour prêter l'argent. Saint Lucia you have to borrow. I think advice sometimes that some senior people give to younger persons, they tell them if you want to achieve anything in life, you need to borrow. You need to pay back, but you need to borrow. But unfortunately, St. Lucia, over the last couple of years, members of the opposite has made it seem like borrowing is a bad thing. And I think I have a document here that I perhaps want to look at. That borrowing and debt is a bad thing. So every time the government goes to parliament and needs to borrow, they make it seem like it's a bad thing. And I have in my hand the official stock of debt in millions of St. Lucia from the year 1988 all the way to the year 2020. And interestingly enough, St. Lucia, in 1997, when the St. Lucia Labour Party came into office, they found a public debt of $625.2 million. That's what it was at. That's what the Sir John administration left them in 1997, $625.2 million. Do you know that by 2006, because they spent about 10 years from 1997 to 2006, in 2006 when they left office, the public debt had risen to $1.624 billion. Mi papi a mwen yi douvan mwen. Si information na li la wrong, c'est moun lan ki yon finance, Ministry of Finance, et c'est toutes ces livres la mwen yi la, toutes ces livres ça wrong too. Because this is the information. So borrowing is a bad thing when perhaps one person does it, I don't know. But from $6.25 million in 1997, our public debt grew to $1.624 billion in 2006. This is what was inherited when the Labour Party left. I'm not too sure how bad the borrowing was or whether the borrowing was good, whether it was necessary. But I can certainly tell you that within that time frame, they borrowed approximately $999.5 million. So they borrowed close to $1 billion in that 10-year period. And maybe it was necessary at the time, I don't know. I have not done an in-depth analysis to justify and to say whether the borrowing was justified or not, whether it was good or not. But it's just to show, I just want you to get an appreciation that in managing your economy, in managing the level of income that you have and the level of expenditure that you will incur in managing some of the capital expenditure, the projects, some of the things, the developments you want to do in the country, your infrastructural developments, your various levels of development. The income or the revenue of the country, in most instances, it's not sufficient for you as the country, and so you have to look for other source of funding. And back in the day, I think we would also all appreciate that we had a lot more countries who gave grants to us for one reason or another. Maybe funding was a little bit more readily available to those bigger countries, and they were more sensitive to small Caribbean islands, and so we had a lot more grants available, and so it was easier for us to depend on those bigger friendly countries to provide some sort of a grant funding for us. But over the years, you would appreciate that our grant funding from some of those bigger countries who themselves have had to perhaps pull back, they have their own fiscal challenges, the money has not been as forthcoming as it could have been or as it should have been, and so government has had to resort to other ways and means of ensuring that they can manage and that they can run the country. I want to also give you a picture of the revenue of the country. The expenditure of the country, if we can put it up on the screen. And remember, I told you what the expenditure was, and where do we spend that money? On what does government spend that money? I think maybe that is the question that a lot of St. Lucians perhaps may ask. They want to say, well, government is getting $1.119 billion, or government is indicating that the expenditure would be $1.6 billion. Where or what are you going to spend that money on? So if we can put it up on the screen, where does the money go? The $1.639 billion, where does it go? Wages and salaries remain the largest expenditure line item for the government. Out of that $1.639 billion, the total amount of $574.41 million is allocated to cover salary payments to employees, retirement benefits, that's our pensioners, NIC contributions, and in-year promotions. The main areas of government expenditure would be, as I said, wages and salaries, which account for 35.1% of the budget. Then you have goods and services. Under the wages of salary, you would have 500, as I said, and 74.41 million. Under goods and services, you would appreciate that you still need to purchase, government needs to purchase fuel, they need to purchase cleaning supplies, they need to purchase furniture. Some of the furniture goes bad, they have to purchase desks and chairs, they need to purchase printers, papers, computers, whatever it is, but government still need to provide and purchase goods and services, and that accounts for $325.4 million. So some of these expenditure items are items that really and truly it's going to be very challenging or difficult for you to cut on. So these are expenditure items you can twist, you can turn, you can maneuver, but there's very little space for maneuvering around some of those expenditure items. And then you have your debt service, and that is inclusive of your principal, and it's also inclusive of your interest charges. And as I said earlier, if you borrow, you need to pay back. And so the principal repayments would be about $125.8 million, and the interest charges would be $175.12 million. And that accounts for 18.4% of the budget. Then you have refunds particularly tax refunds, essentially for those of us who are being overtaxed. You apply, you waiting for that little refund. There's an allocation of $9.5 million for tax refund. And then we have something called transfers, which is $149 million. And transfers, more or less, is inclusive of your subventions that you give to your statutory boards, the school subsidy, the school bus subsidy program, for example. These are called transfers. Grants we give to organizations, maybe small organizations, to encourage them. These would be classified as transfers. Even the monies that we give under the public assistance, we call it sometimes the Paupers program. All these activities are considered to be transfers, and there's very little room to maneuver again under those items, and $149.7 million account for that. And so we go to the bigger thing in terms of the improvement now, your capital expenditure, where you're going to have infrastructural development, where you speak to fixing up your schools, where you fix up your roads, your bridges, and various other programs that you want to implement. Your capital expenditure is $278.6 million. And I think in most instances, your maneuvering is around the capital expenditure. And so in order to ensure that you can cover that shortfall that we spoke about earlier, of that $520 million gap that we spoke about, government has to borrow the money. And in borrowing the money, government looks at not only loans, but they do treasury bills, they do bonds, and also treasury notes, and there's an allocation for each of them in terms of how much do we expect that we would be able to borrow. Now, even before the government makes a prediction that we will be borrowing X amount of money, government has to secure or more or less get a commitment from those financial institutions in terms of the loans that they would be able to borrow that amount of money so that it can be budgeted or allocated in the budget. As I have been told, or as I understand it, if funds from a financial institution is not budgeted, it didn't go to parliament in the estimates, and that let's say you want to borrow from Bank of St. Lucia $100 million, if it's not budgeted in the estimates, you're not able to borrow that money. So you have to be able to get that level of commitment or identify your source of funding, budget for it, seek parliamentary approval in the estimates, and then you can go ahead and now borrow that money. Now, there is a misconception as well, St. Lucia, that every time the government goes to parliament to borrow money, people think that it is new money. And it's very interesting. I know our opposition members know that, but they never clarify that to the public. They never say this is not new money. And so what it is, St. Lucia, is if in your estimates that gap, that financing gap that you have was $300 million, and in there you indicated $100 million you would be borrowing from Bank X, $200 million you would be borrowing from Bank Y. When you have now negotiated with Bank X for that $100 million, notwithstanding that in the initial estimates it went to parliament, it was debated, it was budgeted, you have already gotten the approval, when you are ready to actually borrow the funds, you have to go back to parliament to seek approval to borrow that money that was in the estimates. So essentially it is not new money that you are seeking parliamentary approval to borrow. You are only going to parliament to more or less say to Parliament, in my estimates, I said I was going to borrow $100 million from Bank X. I am now ready to borrow that money. So I am seeking your approval or your permission now to get the parliamentary approval to actually now go and sign off on the loan, sign the loan and sign on the dotted lines so that you can actually get that money. And so I want you to remember that very carefully, St. Lucia, because when the Minister of Finance goes to Parliament and seek authorization from Parliament to borrow money from financial institutions, this is not new borrowing. This is borrowing that has already been approved in the estimates of expenditure, and they are only following the procedure to get parliamentary approval to now go and sign on the dotted line and to borrow that money. I hope I have clarified that to a certain extent for you. I have been told that we will be taking a break tonight. So as we prepare and before we go to the break, when we come back, I am going to now go into the debt. What is it that we borrowed last financial year and what is it that we're planning to borrow? And so you can get a better appreciation of the numbers and the figures, and you can make an assessment for yourself whether this administration has been able to manage the finances and manage the financing gap in a manner that you as St. Lucians would be able to make a determination for yourself. So we will be taking a break, and when we come back, we'll go a little bit more into the numbers and we will open the line to take your calls.
Hello, welcome to the program Champagne in the Morning with yours truly, your favorite guy, Champagne. Join me here every morning from 8 a.m. until 12 noon. We also live on GBD channel 115 and live stream on the internet. Join me as we discuss all of the current events of our beautiful country and around the world. You too could get into the program by calling in 456-0931 or 485-0931. Thank you for tuning in. Join me 8 a.m. to 12 noon.
If I was Prime Minister,
that now go happen. That will never happen. You will never live to see that happen.
When President Trump lost his son, Joe Biden suspended his campaign.
That's true.
He suspended his campaign for 2 days when President Trump lost his son.
Oh, you lie! You lie!
I have it on the record. Lost his son.
Robert Trump, President Trump's younger brother, has passed away after an illness.
That's all, folks.
Hi everyone, I'm Amira Sere and I'm a student at the Monaco Passios Combined School. I'm in grade 6 and my teacher is Miss Stanislas. My favorite subject would be math. I don't normally like it, but my teacher makes it finds a way to make it fun. I also love the positive quote she put up all over the walls. It reminds me to keep going. Also, the new wing is very impressive. The balcony is very large. So at break time, I can eat my snack and, go for a nice little walk. I also like the size of the classroom, so I'm not sticking on anybody because, 6 feet apart. Before, it was a rocky ride coming to school when I normally take the bus. But now, the drivers don't have any complaints now that the district rep fixed it. Before, it was like a rocky, stony road. Dirt road, but now that they fixed it with some concrete and nice tools, it's a smooth ride. I may even fall asleep.
Thank you, Dr. Rigobert.
We've
moved security from 112 to 119 million. We've moved youth and sports from 4.7 million to 7.1 million, and that does not include the money at NLA. We've moved equity from 54 million to 62 million, and we've moved agriculture from 25 million to 28 million. Mr. Speaker, this is where the money has gone. We have not backed down from our responsibilities to the people of this country, and nor we ever will, because we have an ambition to build a new St. Lucia for everyone in this country.
Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me.
Vibes. Before we took the break, I gave you some sort of an explanation, and I hope you understood. In fact, I saw messages of person jotting down and writing down the income and the expenditure and the numbers that I gave. I'm very pleased to see that St. Lucians are taking note. It is your business, it is my business, and hence the reason why I thought it was important for me to come out here and to give you the facts, give you the numbers, and so you can determine and make a decision for yourself. So I'm hoping that I will be getting some very interesting calls tonight. As I said, money, money, money. People love to talk about money. People love to know that their money is accounted for. And you know, St. Lucia, as I was discussing with someone, the money, when the revenues come into the coffers of government, this goes is more or less into the hands of the accountant general. It is in the bank that is overseen by the accountant general. And some people may have the misconception that because Alan Shastey is the Minister of Finance, that Alan Shastey really and truly, you know, like when you're at your home or you have your business, you just take out your checkbook and you write a check, pay this, pay that, etc. and think that Alan Shastey is the one who's just pulling out his checkbook and pay this and pay that. But St. Lucia, I went through pains to explain to you the budget and where the money is going from, because if there is a particular expenditure item that is not budgeted, if it is not, it's one of the experiences that I've had being in government, that if you want to expend a particular item and there is no expenditure head for it, it is not budgeted, it is not in that, you see the big book you see them carrying that has it says the estimates of revenue, it is supposed to be in there, and if it is not in there, my friend, you're not able to buy it, you're not able to purchase it, you're not able to pay for it. I think what I'm told is that as Minister of Finance, you have to go to Parliament and do what you call a supplementary budget to ask for money to pay for this and to buy this. So, St. Lucia, I want you to understand very well that because the Prime Minister is the Minister of Finance, he doesn't sit down and say, we buying this, we paying this, we building that road, we doing this, we doing that. It is the responsibility of the various ministries, and they are headed by their permanent secretaries. They are managed by their permanent secretaries. The minister makes the policy decision. They go to cabinet, they sit down and they make policy decision, but it is the permanent secretaries and the technical people who are at the ministry who manages the finance of the country, who manages the finance that comes into that or that is allocated to that particular department. So, moi vle di je set li se pa kwe Alan Shastey kanik fuye la meya poche le ki ka machin check ek le fini pou di Shastey ka servi la han nou, Shastey ka point la ajan nou. He cannot do it. He really physically cannot do it. He cannot ask and allow for money to be just redirected or sent anywhere. There is a budget office, there's a budget director, there's an accountant general. You have accounts clerk in the accountant general office, and every expenditure item, there are checks and balances that are put in place to ensure that the money is accounted accounted for. So I want to guarantee you, St. Lucia, not only under Alan Chasney, even under the previous administration as well, these policies and these procedures were there, has been there, and it remains, and it will continue to be there. So this is not a free-for-all or spending spree where somebody just comes and starts spending. There's guidance, there's policies, there's procedures, there's a way to do things, and at all times you have to ensure that you do things the way it is supposed to be done. And if anybody knows perhaps the technical people at the various ministries, I can tell you, and nobody going to take chalet for you. It's not being done properly. They'll send you a letter, a memo, and say we're not able to do this. This is the way it's supposed to be done, and they will tell you what is the procedure. So I want you to get it out of your mind if you ever thought for 1 second that as they say, Alan Chasney is just taking our money. How he taking your money? Where can he take your money? The money is in the coffers of government, and he has no access, absolutely no access to that money that is in the coffers of government. So let us go to our economic and social review of 2020, and I just want to give you a brief update in terms of how we fared. What is it we did? What happened in 2020? So you can get an appreciation of how well we managed. Even during the pandemic, we were able to manage. So on page 2 of the Economic and Social Review for 2020, I just wanted to let you know that in terms of the source, it says the source IMF World Economic Outlook, October 2020 and January 2021. And it speaks to the public debt to GDP percentage. And worldwide, the public debt GDP percentage was 98.0%. In the US, it was 131.2%. In the UK, 108%. In Japan, 266.2%. In China, 61.7%, and in India, 89.3%. So this is how some of these economies fared and performed in 2020. If we look at the ECCU and looking at our macroeconomic indicators, and I would tell you that the countries Antigua and Barbuda in 2020, it was 89.0%. Dominica, 90.8%. Grenada, 71.5%. St. Kitts and Nevis, 69.1%. St. Vincent, 88.4%. So I want to give you a joke. And so the CDB posted, although they recalled it, so they posted that on February 25th, 2021, that St. Lucia's debt to gross domestic product GDP ratio was reported at 102%. Oh my God. St. Lucia, can you believe it that there were St. Lucians who were rejoicing over that? It's very sad. But there were St. Lucians who were rejoicing. St. Lucia's debt to GDP is 102%. There was the ray and everything. And then the CDB, on March 18th, 2021, they posted an article. It was a correction, and it said, update on economic data for St. Lucia. And in there they said, on February 25th, 2021, St. Lucia's debt to GDP was reported as 102% on the CDB's information portals. The ratio published at that point was calculated using GDP at basic prices. And the correction is that they should not have used the basic prices. The correct ratio using GDP at market prices, the standard aggregate, and that is the standard aggregate for computing the ratio, is 86.4%. The bank regrets the error. So St. Lucia, in light of even the advance, the bigger countries and the ECCU, I think I want to say kudos. If Champagne was there, or one of them, they would ring the bell for you. I would say kudos to the government of St. Lucia, that being a small country as we are, we still managed and we fared well, that our debt to GDP was at 86.4%. That is good management, in my opinion, and managing as best as possible. Then we get to the issue of the borrowing. And so remember, again, I said to you that you would have a shortfall. This is how much money you expect in your revenue. This is how much money you are projecting for your expenditure for your project. And obviously you would have a financing gap, and you need to find a way to finance that gap. And so in 2020, on page 56 of our Economic and Social Review, I think perhaps they can put it up on the screen for you as well, and you would see that in terms of our debt instrument, how we were able to get new money and finance perhaps some of the gap that we had, you would see that on the new financing, we were able to draw down, and I have to use the term very carefully because that's what I was told, that we were able to draw down on $557.3 million. I know that it has been purported out there that we borrowed $557.3 million, but I stand corrected. I've been given the correct figures in terms of what we got permission to borrow. And so I also want to explain that to you, that some of you, maybe let's say persons who are in the construction sector, if you are building a house, you're building a house valued at $300,000 or even $400,000, and you go to the bank to borrow $300,000. The bank approves the loan, so in principle you have borrowed $400,000. However, in some financial institutions, I don't think it's all, you only pay interest on the drawdown amount of the loan. That's number one. And in particular, when it comes to construction, those of you who have constructed your houses would know that the bank does not give you the $400,000 in one go. You need to have, is it a QS or QC, who's going to work with you, and at various stages of progress on the construction, they will submit a report to the bank. So the bank give you a percentage of the money, you draw down a percentage, they give you $100,000. When you have satisfied and shown them how you have spent that $100,000, you would send a report to them, the QS would sign off on it, etc., and then they will give you another $100,000, and you draw down as you go along. I want you to understand that the same happens for government. That whilst government would have gotten permission to borrow X amount of money, they are only able to draw down on the money when they have started to execute the project, or when they have met the requirements and it is satisfactory, etc. Then they start to draw down on the money. And in some instances, whilst we have gotten the permission to borrow, when you now start negotiating with the financial institution and documentation that you ask, some of them, the process is very tedious. They have a lot of information, a lot of back and forth, etc. It's amazing. I mean, I'm really amazed at the patience and the diligence of some of the staff at the Ministry of Finance, at the Budget Department. I have to say kudos to them, because it's a really tedious process that they have to go through and negotiate, etc., and maneuver their way around to ensure that we can draw down. And so in 2020, St. Lucia, we drew down on $557.3 million. And the reason I'm saying we drew down on it is the same concept of the house, because part of that money that we drew down on, these were all not all monies that we borrowed in 2020. These were funds that we borrowed in 2020 and was able to draw down on, and as well there were funds from 2019 that we had borrowed, but we had not done all the drawdown on it, and so we were also now drawing down on some of the balance of that money in 2020. So I hope you understand that explanation, that this is not the money that we actually borrowed contrary to what some persons have been saying, that we borrowed $557.3 million from the IMF on the COVID relief, and this is not what we gave to the people, etc. I want to say to you, St. Lucia, that this is not true and this is not accurate. That $557.3 million is the amount of money that we were able to draw down based on what we borrowed. But the breakdown of that 557, I can certainly tell you, not all of it was loans. Not all of it was loans. $220.8 million of that money was bonds and treasury note. So out of the $557.3 million that we were able to draw down on, $220.8 million of that was in bonds and treasury notes. So these were not loans. We didn't go to banks and financial institutions to borrow that money. These were bonds and treasury notes that we floated on the market. $27.7 million of that was also treasury bills. So 220.8 plus 27.7 were bonds, treasury notes, and treasury bills. I hope you're following me closely. And the balance of the money, which is only $308.7 million, is what we were able to draw down on loans, St. Lucia. So contrary again to opinion that we borrowed $557 million, it says here new financing. That is not the monies that we borrowed on loans or we took on loans. We only took on our loans $308.7 million. Now, I am going to try to give you a breakdown of that $308.7 million in terms of the financial institutions that we went to borrow that money from, how much we borrowed from that institution, and how much we were able to draw down from that money. Because remember, as I said to you, that whilst we may have gotten permission and borrowed X amount of money, due to depending on the nature of the project that we were executing at the time, you would only be able to draw down per project or per aspect. I also want to clarify, St. Lucia, that $308.7 million, it's not all of it that was allocated or monies that were allocated for our COVID response, because you would appreciate that even during the COVID, the pandemic and the crisis, life went on. We tried as much as possible to ensure that life went on. I'm sure some of you would remember that in April, when the government closed the border and we had a total lockdown, we had a total shutdown, our commitments to our public servants remain. Your commitments to perhaps some of your suppliers, it remain. And whilst perhaps you had a total shutdown of the economy and your borders, there were certain things that were still operational. Our hospitals were still operational. Our firemen, our police officers, they were still going to work. They still had to go to work. They still consume fuel, etc., etc. So you still had economic activity. It's not like everything was at a standstill and there was no activity happening and that you didn't incur expenditure. You still incurred expenditure. So whilst there was no money coming in, you still had money going out because you were spending and you were expending. And so at the end of the day, when I hear that we borrowed money for COVID, for income support, and we never gave the money for income support, I thought it was important to clarify that statement, because I know technology is at our fingertips, and a lot of persons went on the website of the IMF and they read some of the information. They even played the tapes of the managing director of the IMF in terms of some of the comments that she made, and things are twisted in and out of context, of course, to suit our purposes. But I just want to read you maybe two lines or two paragraphs from the letter of intent this is a public letter because at the end of the letter it says we authorize the fund to publish this letter and St. Lucia's request for a disbursement on the RCF. So this is not a private letter. This is not a leaked document. This is not a secret document. I just want St. Lucians to understand that this is a public letter. And I want to read to you the request that St. Lucia made to the IMF under the rapid facility for the fund. And so perhaps after I read the letter, it will clarify in your mind once and for all that St. Lucia never asked the IMF for money to provide income support alone to St. Lucians. I will read you the letter that was sent, and on that basis is how we got the money, and you will determine for yourself. And so it was a letter dated April 21st, 2020. Very early in the pandemic, the Prime Minister had the vision. He knew what was coming, how the impact of the pandemic would have been. And so, as the old people say, "I point devant avant devant point." And he sent this letter on April 21st, 2020. And in point number 1, it says, St. Lucia is confronting the strong repercussions from the global coronavirus pandemic. So far, we have had 15 cases which tested positive for COVID-19. As a measure to contain the spread of the virus, as measures to contain the spread of the virus are implemented around the world, we have seen a dramatic drop in our bookings by overseas visitors, which in a typical year would account for almost 90% of our foreign exchange earnings. Indeed, our tourism industry is now closed and government revenues have plummeted. Furthermore, our ability to meet our usual fiscal financing needs has been compromised by the turmoil in domestic and regional financing sources. And so here the government is laying the foundation as to the impact and the potential impact of the pandemic in our request to the IMF. In bullet number 5, it says, against this backdrop, and so bullet number 2 speaks to, it's just laying the foundation about the global events, the pandemic, what is happening, etc., etc. In bullet number 5, it says, against this backdrop, the government of St. Lucia requests emergency financing from the IMF in the equivalent of SDR 21.4 million, which is about US $29 million, corresponding to a disbursement of 100% of our quota. And so it would seem to suggest that there was a quota allocated to various countries, and St. Lucia's quota was about $29 million US. And so St. Lucia was requesting a 100% of our quota under the rapid credit facility shocks window to meet the financing needs associated here at St. Lucia, to meet the financing needs associated with the increased healthcare spending needs, a precipitous drop in government revenue, and as a consequence of no tourist arrivals, we have unconstrained financing on the regional and international markets. These urgent balance of payments, if not addressed, could result in immediate and severe economic disruption and social pathologies. And it goes on to speak to our deteriorating fiscal position, etc., etc. And so at the end it says, we look forward to an expeditious approval of our request for financial assistance and want to underline our appreciation for the speed and determination that the fund has shown in responding to the financial and technical support needs of its membership. St. Lucia, we never said to the IMF that we wanted money for income support. I read the letter twice. I was looking for income support where we said we want it for income support only. I never saw that there. We spoke to the financing gap. We spoke to our ability of not being able to meet our usual fiscal financing needs, and we made the request to the IMF for the funding to assist us in meeting that financing gap. And that is why the Prime Minister, when he went to Parliament to seek permission, to seek parliamentary approval for the money, the Prime Minister in his speech, I think in point number 4, and you can get that in Hansard at the parliamentary office if you wish to. It says that our government sought financial assistance under this facility due to the anticipated financing gaps arising from the sharp contraction of net exports and the significant fiscal needs to immediately increase and to assist our public health spending. The financing from the facility would be used to provide budget support for the 2020-2021 budget. Part of this amount represents counterpart financing for the JICA bridge, tax relief, and cash transfers to the most vulnerable and affected. So St. Lucia, there was never any communication or talk of St. Lucia asking for this $29 million to provide only income support to St. Lucians, where some people want you to believe that we lied to the IMF, we used COVID to the IMF to say we want to borrow $557.3 million, and we never use it for the people. I am giving you, I am reading you, I am showing you the facts, I'm showing you the letter that was sent to the IMF, etc. And as I said, the IMF understood, they agreed, and the money was granted to St. Lucia. I also indicated I was going to tell you the $308 million in loans. Where did we get it from? I see we're at 9:30, so I'm going to get ready to take some calls. But just before we take the calls, I want to inform you that from the Caribbean Development Bank, we were able to draw down $117 million from them. And the financing, some of the money we drew down, it was only $81 million was allocated to emergency support for the government's financing gap in 2020 to relieve short-term liquidity pressures. And that money, St. Lucia, again, I want to emphasize, is that the country kept on running. In spite of COVID, you would appreciate that whilst we had a total lockdown, we gradually reopened. Public servants had to be paid. We had the respiratory hospital that we had to transform VH into. We had to transition into OKEU. You have additional staff. You had ventilators we were sourcing. We had persons who were assisting us with that. The testing equipment, the testing supplies, the quarantine facilities that we had to set up, etc. The income support we provided, even when we had the total lockdown, the 10,000 food packages that we provided, all these monies, St. Lucia, we had to use those monies to ensure that we could provide support and that we could continue the operations of government. So when we hear people twist information and they twist facts and numbers to suit them, sometimes you have to take a little time, get your information, and then you show where we're at and what the truth is. So we will open the lines. We will open the lines. I've put the phone back on, so we will open the lines. If you have any questions, if you have any queries, if you wish to ask me any more question on this, I'll feel free to answer to the best of my ability. But while we wait for our calls, I got some interesting information as well in clarifying that matter. I wanted to understand the drawdown in terms of when did we get some of the money. So I think we have a call. I think we're going to, let me take the call on this one. Okay, let me just take this call. Hello, good evening, Constituency Vibes. Thank you for calling.
Merci, bonsoir.
Good night.
Bonjour, on compte sur ça là. Nancy.
Vous voulez parler un petit peu plus fort, puis je bien à nous?
Oui, Nancy. M'entends-moi?
Oui, Nathanou.
Ok. Ça c'est bon show. Dans le côté en Bible là, qui dit, un bon gouvernement qui a prêté, et qui a prêté, qui a prévié. Un mauvais gouvernement qui a prêté, mais qui a prévié. Nancy, moi je suis veille. Je suis à côté de moi, je marché soit veille, aller deux fois à pour là. Moi, je suis allé là, Saltibis, à volant, tout partout. Là, le côté Saltibis, au parc. Moi, je suis là, à volant. Moi, je suis là, comme là, même au parc là, là, quand c'était mon. Quand moi, son ulan kasa maman, moi, moi, ça. Bon, mon tapé, c'est un chai poule. C'est pas un gros poule blanc, c'est une poule naturelle là. Nous tenions dans un cage sac. Et tu as laissé ces poules là. Il y a un certain monde qui a boit 6 ans, on nous te paye, parce que la cause c'est dit blanc. Nous te paye. Tout le monde a moi un deuxième Nancy. Là, tout le monde a pas toi. Moi un deuxième. Un monsieur qui a déclaré, si tu as ça ici, qui a coupé chivé. Moi, quand on est là, parce que c'est le jeu Saltibis là. En fait, là, moi, pays là. En fait, nous avons sorti. Nous te payé. Moi, je te paye. Tout ça pour la galaxie, en dépied, nous assise là. Vous avez qu'à tirer pour là. Et qu'à faire la mer en face pour là. Et qu'à prendre en face pour là. Moi, je la vie, moi. Et qu'à pas casser. Et là, c'est qu'à garder nous, qu'à oui. Qu'à voir les affaires pour là. Moi, ça. Il faut petit temps, ça caresse moi. Il mort. Puis ça démenti moi. Si on a démenti moi, puis de me savoir, il était là, quand ça. Moi, je vais bon projet pour. Moi, je vais la vie, moi. Et moi, je vais faire ça. Et les projets sociaux, il y a des cas, oui. Mais c'est que l'école là vient de voir ce bâtiment.
So Kola, est-ce que vous comprenez ça? Moi, je parler à votre souhait, je parler à votre l'argent, et puis qui manière le gouvernement a prêté l'argent, et puis pour qui ça le gouvernement pour prêter l'argent? Ou ka sonner qu'on monsieur qui n'est expérience, c'est que moi, si vous êtes d'accord, peut-être parce qu'en lave, vous allez en banque, vous avez prêté l'argent, parce que l'argent doit être ni en panier assez, et puis là, on est pour faire ça, on est pour prêter l'argent. Moi, si vous ça dit nous à votre ça, hein?
Un bon gouvernement qui a prêté, il a payé.
Oui.
Un mauvais gouvernement qui a prêté, il n'a pas payé.
Moi, d'accord.
C'est comme ça, il y a.
Ok. Merci.
Vous êtes tellement ça, Premier ministre, ça a fait à boire ce pays à Banou.
Merci. Merci, Kola. Ok. All right. Ok. Well, ni un bon soir, nous allons pour l'autre call.
Ok.
Ok, parle. Hello, good evening. You're on Constituency Vibes. Thank you for calling.
Good evening, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm not too sure if our callers can hear you.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello?
Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, Nancy. You started showing or discussing the borrowing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You started by showing the borrowing activities of the government. You compared the Sojourn era with $625 million to what the Labour Party left in 2006 with $1.6 billion. They in fact increased the debt by almost $1 billion. That was clear. But what about their borrowing in 2011 when they came in to 2016? They continue to say that the Alan Chasney government has increased the debt by $2 billion, which is not right. So is it possible that you can tell the public, compare what the Prime Minister Alan Chasney's government has borrowed over the 2016 to 2020 compared to what they borrowed in 2011 to 2016 in terms of the statement that the former Prime Minister made regarding their inability to borrow because they had borrowed so much that the deficit was much too high. So if it's possible that you can go through that period and make a comparison between 2011 to 2016 and 2016 to 2020.
Thank you, caller. I would love to do that because whilst I do have the numbers, I would love to be able to calculate the percentages and tell you the percentages, etc. So maybe next week when we meet, I'll be able to do an analysis and give you a proper breakdown and an analysis of their borrowing. But the reason I showed the figures
because what happened is just give me a minute. What happened is the Labour Party increased the debt. The Labour Party increased the debt every year by 9%.
Yes, that is correct. If you were to do an analysis.
Prior to 2020, the Alan Chasney government increased the debt by 3.5%, and it owned an average of 3.5% per year. And only because of COVID that 2020 went up to 10%, making it an average of 4.5% per year. So in other words, the Alan Chasney government administration increased the national debt by 4.5% on the average per year in the worst of times. Whereas the Kenny Anthony administration
in the best of times
the debt by 9%, almost twice as much.
In the best of time.
They got to the point, best of time, and they got to the point where they couldn't even borrow. And they have the audacity to stand up and talk about increasing the debt. I mean, the solution public need to know that. There's another issue I want to point out as well, is the reason for increasing the state of emergency.
Right.
Continue the state of emergency for until October 16th. I think the solution public is confused because they get so much misinformation that they are confused as to the real reason behind increasing or continuing with the state of emergency. A lot of people are telling, like the Sean was saying in the House of Assembly, that it's not necessary. I would really appreciate it if this radio station and others as well could come out and outline the reasons for increasing or continuing with that state of emergency until October.
Well, caller,
I think it is necessary that the nation understands.
I can tell you two things, so perhaps in response to both. I brought up the issue of the borrowing, and I went and I tried as much as possible to explain the need and why we need to borrow. Even every administration needs to borrow money, and what I do not want people to be misguided by, which is why I said over the last few years, unfortunately, the opposition has tried They have not been very successful, but some people still do believe. But the opposition has tried to make it seem that borrowing is a bad thing. Whereas in their days, in their tenure, they understand why you have to borrow. They understand the need to borrow. But what I can tell you as well, with the difference with borrowing with the Labour Party and the borrowing with this UWP administration, the Prime Minister has ensured and tried as much as possible. And if you look at perhaps our borrowing and the terms of borrowing the money, we have pushed over the last few years, the Prime Minister has pushed in terms of financing, especially on the climate resilience, that the cost of borrowing is much lower than the cost of borrowing of the previous administration. And so in the case of the monies that we have borrowed from the Taiwanese, for example, we have borrowed the money and for the airport and even for our road infrastructure project, we get a 5-year moratorium on those loans. Where have you heard that happen before? That is negotiation by this administration. And at the end of the 5-year moratorium, the interest rate on those loans are at about 4.5%. Very low rates are negotiated for those loans. So it's not only a matter of borrowing, but we are also looking at borrowing at lower rates as well. And that will also reduce on your interest and your principal amount. In terms of the state of emergency, Colum, I may have to hang up on you if you're done.
Pardon?
I said I may have to tell you hang up and then I'll answer your question.
I can free up the line.
Yes, free up the line so I can answer your question with reference to the state of emergency. Okay. I want to explain to St. Lucians again. I know a lot of them followed the debate in Parliament yesterday, and true to their nature, the opposition came out and said they do not support the state of emergency and they do not think that there is a need for the state of emergency. But St. Lucia, I can certainly tell you there's one thing I can guarantee you, that if the oppositions were the ones in office, they would have had a state of emergency continuously. But we have tried as much as possible to manage the pandemic in such a way that we allow for St. Lucians to be able to get back to their life as normal. And the Prime Minister gave the numbers in terms of where we're at with COVID. St. Lucia, COVID is still there. We have tried to ensure that we can reopen our economy in bits and pieces and in different phases. So sometimes people may think that everything is okay, but everything is still not okay. We still have COVID with us and we still have to be mindful and we still have to be careful. And so at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has gone to Parliament and asked and said, and we have said continuously, the state of emergency gives the power to the administration that should, in case there is a spike or anything happens and you need to pull back immediately, you have that state of emergency that allows you to be able to pull back. But as you can see over the last year, during the intervals that we have instituted the state of emergency, we have never abused, the government has never abused that power. There is not one power under the state of emergency that people can point out and to say the government has abused that power. The state of emergency has always been implemented. We have asked for it to allow the government to implement a curfew that will assist us in restricting the movement of people during the most risky period. And I think, St. Lucia, you would appreciate, during the day, when everybody can see us, we keep to the protocols, we put our masks, we try to social distance, although sometimes you are not too mindful of it. But because during the daylight, it's easy for people to see and for enforcement to happen, we do this. But once the 6 o'clock and the 7 o'clock hour hits, then everybody feels that they can take the risk. And COVID is not transported via the air. It's transported via people, via movement. As we move along, we go, we meet with friends, we socialize, we go to this party, we go to this club, we go to this, we go see our families, our loved ones, whatever activities we are engaged in. Once we are not careful, we are the ones traveling and bringing COVID here or there. And so at the end of the day, The state of emergency allows for there to be the implementation of a curfew, and the Prime Minister clearly outlined that the curfew has helped and assisted in more than one ways in helping us to combat the pandemic, in helping us to manage the level that we're at. I think that the last number I saw, we were just slightly above the 100 active cases. We continue to still see fluctuation in us going up and us going down. The numbers go 10, sometimes 14, and then it goes back down. So we still have the pandemic to manage. We're still at the point, St. Lucia, where we need to be careful and we need to be mindful. And so it's unfortunate, perhaps, that the only thing that is at the back of the minds of the opposition is elections, elections, elections. The Prime Minister has indicated that elections will be called when it is due and when he's ready to call it. But at the end of the day, it is people that we need to ensure we safeguard first. So let's take this other call. Good evening. Thank you for calling, caller. Constituency Vibes. Welcome to the program.
Yes, good evening, Nancy. As always, it's a pleasure watching and listening to you. I want to thank you for the analysis you gave of the borrowing earlier on in the program. Because sometimes it is good to refute the lies with facts. The Labour Party consistently gives lies. The Labour Party from the outset has been lying to the people of St. Lucia. You name it, they've done it. Think about Greenberg. Think about the seabed issue. They either keep the facts from the people of St. Lucia, and when it comes out, they tell lies upon lies upon lies. Think about the Jufali issue. To date, there is the dishonorable, because I cannot call him honorable unless he's there. He's dishonorable. To date, he cannot give the people of St. Lucia a truthful explanation. Now, it has been said that there's this part was saying, voler pas jamais everywhere.
Kamawad li kapote sak.
Yes. So, because their whole being is so steeped in life, they always feel that everybody else is telling a lie. But that is what they do. That is what they deal in. The Labour Party is a stranger to the truth. And all they do is fool the people of St. Lucia. Fool the people of St. Lucia. Tell them lies. Tell them half-truths. Now we have a leader of the opposition who I believe is only fooling himself. Because the kinds of things this man talks about sometimes, I wonder if he really has the ability to think any longer. It is sad. It is really sad. But thank you. And an earlier caller asked a very pertinent question. The borrowing of the Labour administration between 2011 to 2016. And when you bring the analysis as you promised, it will be shown again that they are the ones who are plunging this country into chaos and misery. I don't even want to contemplate what would have happened to St. Lucia had the Labour Party been in government in this pandemic. By now, we would have been dead.
Well, a lot of persons have asked that question, caller. A lot of persons have asked. They wonder what would have happened and where would we be right now if the Labour Party.
We would have been gone. Because, I mean, just imagine they having march in the middle of the pandemic. You know, the kind of irresponsibility. The final thing I want to say I have said from times for years now, anytime you hear the Labour Party accuse UWP of wrongdoing, look at them. They have done that, whatever it is they accuse the Labour Party, the UWP of, they have done it several times over. Every single thing. And Nancy, I am sure you can remember, because you know who's speaking, I am sure you can remember me making that statement in times past.
Mm-hmm.
Every time, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that the Labour Party has accused the UWP of, that they are not guilty of several times over. And I said it before and I'll say, if any Labour supporter can come and show me one thing they accuse the UWP of, and they are not guilty of it, I will give them that person $100. Anything at all. Good night.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for calling, caller. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, St. Lucia, but it's interesting. It's very interesting. And that is the reason I thought that I wanted to take my time. I wanted to make sure that I get you the information so that you would see and perhaps understand the facts and the numbers, because they are what speak for themselves. So we have another call. Let me try and take a call on the cell. Hi, good evening, caller. Thank you for calling.
Good evening, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, caller.
Very good program. I like this because very often the Labour Party, like you, would make St. Lucians believe that this government managed the economy. They borrowed so much. They borrowed uselessly. It's not paying any, giving any, it's not giving any rewards, not showing any debt. The issue of the loan that the government took to in terms of this how do you call it, the $500 and something million that the government borrowed, requested.
Go ahead, caller. Oh, I think we may have lost that caller. Okay, let's take another call. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling Constituency Vibes. Welcome to the program. Caller, can you hear me? I'm not sure, but I'm seeing a lot of missed calls on the cell phone. I'm not too sure if you're experiencing some technical difficulties, but caller, if you don't mind, you can call again. Yes, but maybe as the previous caller was saying, maybe he will try to call back. Okay, let's see if we can take the call. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling Constituency Vibes. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling Constituency Vibes. Welcome to the program.
Good night,
Nancy, let me tell you something. For days on, Good.
Hello?
Hello?
Good night, Miss Nancy.
Good night, caller. Thank you for calling.
Thank you. Why would any right-thinking person...
I can hear you. Go ahead, caller.
Why would any person in the right mind ever carry the thought of voting for an SLP? A party that could not control a school, that breaks up the country, and you could go on and on. Nobody would like money. Why would anybody in common sense vote for that party? As a matter of fact, the SLP should not even be on the ballot. I have been asking for a while now for any SLP supporter or member to give me one good reason why the SLP is on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to vote for someone, and if you can't give me a good reason, not even one good reason, those people are dumb.
I think, Kola, did you listen to the debate yesterday in Parliament?
I don't know. I didn't know.
Okay, because I think a lot of St. Lucians, I got a lot of calls and messages, and based on the interaction that I had with ordinary St. Lucians, that the expectation was that the opposition would have understood where we're at. And whilst I know they're excited and they're looking forward to the upcoming elections, I think most St. Lucians are, that they would have at least in this instance understood and put the health care and the health of St. Lucians first. But the opposition missed that opportunity because they went on and on about elections and tried to create the impression that because of the state of emergency that elections could not be held, notwithstanding looking at what has happened in the region from last year. Mostly all the countries within the region who held elections during that time held it under a state of emergency. So St. Lucians clearly understand and saw for themselves yesterday that really the opposition and the Labour Party is not about St. Lucia and it's not about St. Lucians. It's about elections and winning elections and being in power, because there was no need for them not to stand up in Parliament and to say, notwithstanding the circumstances we understand where the country is at, and we will support the extension of the state of emergency for the safety and the security of St. Lucians. That is what was expected of them. And so, as you said, perhaps that would have been a reason somebody could have given you to say, okay, that is why I will perhaps support the opposition. But unfortunately, I think they missed that boat.
Could you imagine SFP being in power in this pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
3/4 solution will be dead. 3/4. Let me say this to you, Miss Nancy. A good Bermuda friend of mine over here, St. Lucian. Well, he's not Bermuda, St. Lucian. He was an ardent supporter of the SFP.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, we used to argue, he told me Alan Shasta could never be Prime Minister of St. Lucia.
Right.
Now, he's Alan Michael Shasta #1 supporter. You know what he said? You know what he asked me last week? He said to me, St. Lucian, tell me something. If the SFP was in power, was in Bermuda, how many votes do you think they would get? So I said 100. You know what he said to me?
Uh-huh.
Man, you're more stupid than I thought. He said to me they will get one vote. The whole party will not get one vote. That is no joke. The whole party will not get one vote.
Yeah.
So that leads me to ask the question. If the SFP will get one vote in Bermuda, what is the solutions that they're thinking of? Are they dumb, backward, and stupid?
No, St. Lucians, Kola, I want you to appreciate, and it's one thing I've come to appreciate about St. Lucians, and which is why I try to ensure, as I said, every time I am on a program, I give facts, numbers, statistics, and information. St. Lucians have shown us over the years that they do not fall anymore for us just coming in and just throwing things at them without showing or providing evidence. St. Lucians are a thinking people. They analyze things. They want information, and I believe that once you give them sufficient truthful and factual information, they will make the right decision. I am going to use as much as possible the opportunities that I have and the times that I have those opportunities to give St. Lucians pertinent factual information, because I believe that in the final analysis that they will make the right and the best decision.
I beg to differ from what you're saying. How in the world a man like Kenyasi could perform so much atrocities and become Prime Minister again?
Yeah.
So what you say to me? That's unheard of. Those atrocities here that he committed. In any first world country, not only first world, because let me say this to you, in the Caribbean, he been living in exile. He been living in exile. Places like Trinidad and Barbados, he been in exile. in the first world country, they would lost him in jail.
Yeah. So caller, we have a few more persons who are trying to call. I have the cell phone which is good, but thank you so much for listening and thank you for calling consistently. I really do appreciate it. Let's see if we can take a few more calls because I know it's 10 o'clock.
So Allah Shaste is the greatest and the best leader on the planet.
Thank you very much, and I endorse this message, caller. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling Constituency Vibes. Thank you for welcome to the program.
Good evening, Nancy. It's me again. Sorry, the call dropped.
Apparently, I'm sorry.
I was about saying when we lost connection. There's this so-called talk show host on every Thursday night. I call it the horror show. Comes and says how the government got COVID relief funds and never gave it to the average St. Lucian. Trying to give the impression that the government got access that loan and the average St. Lucian did not benefit from it. And I was happy that you explained.
Yeah, I did the breakdown, yes, caller. The intention was to ensure at the end of the day, and I'm sure you understand, as I said, that we did not borrow $557.3 million. This was the drawdown on our financing for that financial year. As a matter of fact, we only borrowed in terms of loans. We borrowed $308.7 million, and the breakdown of the loan, as I gave you, we got monies from the Caribbean Development Bank. We drew down $117 million from the Caribbean Development Bank. From the World Bank IDA facility, we drew down $59.59 million, and the IMF fund that your friend was talking about, and the letter that I read that we sent to the IMF, we drew down $78.8 million from that fund. So obviously, I'm hoping that St. Lucians who are listening will understand that there was no secret, there was no big heyday or anything in that regard. Everything was very transparent, everything is very clear in terms of our borrowing, and I think it's unfair to accuse the administration of using COVID to borrow money, because this is an administration that would never do such. Whatever it is we intended to borrow the money for, we have used it according to the purposes that we have borrowed the monies for.
I will explain, but we need to highlight that often because he keeps repeating it over and over on his show. And you know, St. Lucians, the more they hear things, the more they tend to believe. We need to keep reminding St. Lucians and dispelling that lie, dispelling that mistruth, dispelling that propaganda by that so-called talk show host. So I'm happy that you clear the air on that issue.
Thank you.
Added to that, the government still assisted persons during that pandemic. When the pandemic was at its peak, you remember through the National Insurance Corporation,
oh, for
persons
sure,
did get assistance.
Caller, I don't know if you remember, at the early stages of the pandemic, when St. Lucia had created quarantine facilities at the hotels for our returning nationals. Do you remember pictures that were floating around of quarantine facilities in St. Vincent and some other Caribbean countries where people were lying on the floor, there were no beds, they were in schools, etc. And compare the level of service that was given to our St. Lucian people. I'm not sure if you remember that. All these things cost money. These were not free of charge. So sometimes when I hear people say that the government has not provided assistance to the people, I say, well, where do you think the money came from for us to pay to ensure that our St. Lucians came back home in comfort? Where do you think the money came from to ensure that we were able to get the cruise ship to our nationals who were stuck all over the place to bring them back home? Where do you think the money came from for us to conduct over all these tests that we have conducted so far, to purchase the equipment, purchase the PCR tests, and all these things are free of charge? Where do you think the money comes from?
Listen, Nancy, and you're on point, you're so correct. But you see, we need to keep reminding St. Lucians, we need to keep repeating it over and over so that the propaganda by the Labour Party and the operatives and the horror show on Thursday, when St. Lucians hear these things, they will not take it on, they will not believe. So we need to keep saying it and repeating it over and over. But when you look at in the whole scheme of things, look at what's happening in Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago right now presently on a total lockdown. The UK is in a lockdown. Canada is in lockdown. This government managed this pandemic very, very well.
Yes, and that's why, you need to emphasize the need for the state of emergency, because if we do not have that level where we were able to pull back and where we were able to institute certain measures, it will be a free-for-all, and St. Lucia, we will go back into lockdown. And I know for sure, if you see what's happening in India, that's not what we want. You know, this is not what we want. So St. Lucians understand and appreciate that sometimes tough decisions are being made, but those decisions are being made in the best interest of every single St. Lucia.
Good. Just to the line, but just to add on what you said about the state of emergency, I followed the House sitting yesterday, and that this opposition, the Labour Party, is just useless. I regard them as the most useless opposition in the entire Caribbean. To tell the government is, like you said, going to Parliament to extend that state of emergency. The state of emergency is just there so that the government can enforce, as you rightly said, the Prime Minister explained the curfew. As you rightly said again, people are more reckless, some of them, in their behavior during the night time. They won't have parties, no social distancing, not wearing their masks. So the government is saying, look, from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., you have your liberties to do what you want and whatever. Bearing in mind that you follow the protocols. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But the Labour Party and the operatives will want St. Lucians to believe that the government is infringing on their freedom, their rights, and what have you. And that's not true. This is a pandemic that affects each and every one of us. No color, no political affiliation, no country. But we have to understand, as St. Lucians, we have to secure ourselves, our family, and likewise. So what the government is doing is to protect us.
Yep.
The Prime Minister has no advantage by extending the state of emergency. What the Prime Minister and the government is trying to do is to protect us as St. Lucians.
Yep.
And I'm appealing to St. Lucians, do not listen to the operatives of the Labour Party and the hierarchy of the Labour Party. Maintain your protocols, keep your social distancing, wear your mask, and do what you're supposed to do to protect yourself and your family.
Yes.
And look at what's within the midst of the pandemic. St. Lucia is still doing very well. The government was able to slowly open the country. A few of the tourism, the hotel workers went back to work. The
economy, you do. We have a few of them.
Going. Civil servants still get their salary on time. Look, just a few months ago, 2 months ago, St. Vincent Prime Minister announced that he didn't know when he was been unable to pay public servants.
I remember seeing that.
Pensions. But St. Lucia you're not hearing that from St. Lucia. The government was able to
every single month, it must be. I mean, the government column must be commended, because every single month from last year till now, the government has been able to pay public servants their salaries in full. You know, so this is a government that has tried. Can you imagine the 12,000 public servants that we have? Can you imagine those public servants not being able to get their salary, the impact it would have on their families, on their responsibilities, their bills, everything? And so when you look at ensuring that we protect lives and livelihood, that is what we're talking about. This is a government that is very sensitive to these issues.
Just to finish off, right here in the US, St. Lucia, all over the world, we follow international news. And up here in the US, as you know rightfully, the government, the Congress had to give corporations bailout so that they can keep workers on. Right? Some small businesses had to close and they will never reopen because of the pandemic. The government gave stimulus checks, even for persons. whether you're working or not, they give a stimulus check because they understand that the pandemic tremendously affected everybody. This government of St. Lucia, the UWP government, has done a remarkable job at managing economy, bearing in mind all the effects of the pandemic. So I'm just saying to St. Lucians, when that time comes, when the Prime Minister rings the bell, do not be deterred. Look at what's happening around the world with India, like you said, and other countries, that the pandemic is really, really hitting hard. I'm not saying people's lives were not lost. One life is too much, and it's very unfortunate, but this government managed the pandemic very well. And just on that premise alone, we should re-elect the United Workers' Party.
Thank you. Thank you very much, caller. Thank you. I agree and I endorse this statement as well. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you very much, caller. I see my technicians are shaking their heads at me and they're saying it's after 10 o'clock. Some of us have to travel far. But St. Lucia, I really appreciate it. Do we have time for this one last call? Let's just take this one last call. Caller, thank you very much for calling Constituency Vibes. You're our last caller this evening, so you're our lucky caller.
Lucky me. Good show.
Thank you very much.
Good show. Good show. Nancy, I would like to say to the Labour Party, especially the Danes, who continue. They keep on saying that the Prime Minister is borrowing and borrowing. And my take on that is that the SLP, they keep on crying about the borrowing and the borrowing and the borrowing. The fact of the matter is that they cannot hold the economy to pay back the debt. So hence the reason they don't want the Prime Minister to take any money. So if, in case they get elected, they will not have much to do. They're afraid to work the economy. They know they cannot work it. So then they fool the people's heads talking about borrowing money and borrowing money. But when you're lazy, you're lazy. You know what I mean of lazy? You sit yourself down and you do not want to work for $1 to feed your family. That is the lazy party. They do not want to work to pay their bills. And they already tell it to us that they will not be able to borrow. So if you're telling me that you will not be able to borrow, why come in the political arena? Why come to fool the people's heads and you know that you will not be able to deliver for these people? You know, what sense does it make that you confuse the people, fool the people's head with a whole bunch of nonsense, and then you cannot deliver in the end for the people? Look when in the best of times, the IMF came to you all and tell you that you have to cut down the civil servant salary. It's not now under that economic crisis that you will come there and keep the government running like this administration is doing now. They will not be able to do it. And they know that. And you know what hurt me more? The hierarchies of the St. Lucia Labour Party know very well. They know very well where this government is taking St. Lucia. This government has St. Lucia on the right track. But they're just using the little man on the streets to see if they could get that vote. Which is wrong. That is really being deceiving. Like Richard Frederick called them, the mighty deceivers. If you know you cannot do it, do not come in the arena. Allow the gentleman to finish do his work, because you're not crying that things are hard, you all cannot borrow, you all say the Prime Minister have the country in a mess. Well, let him clean up his mess. You know?
Anyway. Yeah. Caller, you are breaking up. Okay, I think we broke up. The caller is breaking up. So, but caller, thank you very much for calling. You were our final caller. And yes, I would concur with you that this administration has been doing a fantastic job in managing the economy of St. Lucia. Remember, when we came into government, you had, under the previous administration, 4 years of negative growth, no growth at all. And within the first year, we were able to turn the economy around, and we have seen positive growth throughout, except for 2020, in which year we had the pandemic. So for sure, St. Lucia, you can see the team of men and women that you have in the cabinet of ministers with the Alan Chasney administration has been managing the country. We have been managing the economy, and we have been managing the meager resources of the country as well. We have been managing our borrowing, who we borrow from, what do we borrow, how much do we borrow, and ensure that we borrow also at concessionary rate. This is something that is phenomenal. It was unheard of, because sometimes as countries, you are desperate, you go to those financial institutions, and they are the ones who put together the rates, and the Prime Minister was determined that he would be able to negotiate concessionary rates on his loans, and we have been able to do that, and by the grace of God we will continue to do that. So St. Lucia, I hope tonight I was able to, in my own way, I tried as much as possible to break it down to you in layman's language, to get you to understand the need for a country. When there is a need, why do we have to borrow? It doesn't mean that we are being reckless when we borrow, but once you are able to manage your finances accordingly, and you can show a clear path as to how you're going to ensure that the monies that you have borrowed, that they can be to the benefit of the people, and you have shown a clear path that you can pay back. I want to tell you, borrowing is not a bad word, it's not a bad term. Sometimes it is a necessary, I don't want to say evil, but it may be a necessary evil that you have, to do. But I can certainly guarantee you that the cabinet of ministers, minister and this minister of finance, does not just go out and borrow money for no reason. We've been able to do it in a manner, and that is why I just want to close by reminding you that we have not been on a borrowing spree. And so in 2019, when you look at our loans, we borrowed $113.2, only $113.2 million. That's what we borrowed. Our financing gap was in the region of about $300 million. We only borrowed, in this new financial year, we had to borrow the $308 million because you had a greater financing gap because of COVID, and we still had the expenditures, as I said, of running the hospital, of OKEU, of the testing, the PPR, the PPE equipment, PPE that we needed, and all these additional expenditures associated with COVID, including the financing gap, your budgetary financing gap that you needed to provide for, because your revenue had streamlined significantly, and so the government had to ensure that it had to do what it had to do. So when we hear talk sometimes that we're borrowing money, we're not giving the money to the people, I think St. Lucians on a whole appreciate and have seen how this administration has been sensitive towards their plight, have ensured that we put, this was the first thing that we did, ensure that we put in place support, income support, and other necessary support to the poor, to the vulnerable, to the unemployed of St. Lucia, to ensure that we could ride that wave, ride that storm that we are currently going through called COVID-19. But St. Lucia, I want to say, perhaps as our theme for independence, we can, we will, we are a resilient nation. Whatever it is that we put our minds to, we can and we will do it. And so I encourage you to listen to factual information, read factual information. I encourage you to do your research. Do not only take what is it that we say and what is it that we tell you, but do your research, read for yourself, and in the final analysis, when you are ready to make a decision, you will make a decision based on facts and statistics and not on hearsay, he say, and she say. So thank you very much, St. Lucia, for being with me. I can see a lot of my friends on Facebook and a lot of friends, persons who are avid listeners to this radio station and the television station. I want to say thank you very much for staying with us, for following, for your comments. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your support. I appreciate the loves and the likes. And hopefully we will meet again and we will discuss the business of this country, and we will bring you our facts, our numbers, and our figures. So thank you very much. Have a safe evening, St. Lucia, and good night.
Welcome, listeners and viewers. Join me, your host, Ricky Alexander, every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on your favorite program, Constituency Vibes, on 93.1 FM, Sky FM, and on GDV TV 115. Your program, Constituency Vibes, every Wednesday. Join me.
On behalf of the community of Olemon Granny Dairy, we would like to say a heartfelt thank you to Senator Ferropolius for the work that she has commenced in our community. As a result of this, we now have access to quality roads and better drainage. We do appreciate it. We look forward to working with you in the future and we wish you the best of luck in the next general election.
The government have done excellent. I don't see how they will take out that government from there and put on other governments. What are you going to put there for us? We already have, we getting it good. It's already going good for us, and Ms. Fortuna is our representative for our area here. So to me, she have to bring it home. And we have to support her in bringing it home. I want her to bring it home. It's Flaboy. They have nowhere else to vote again. It's Flaboy you have to vote for it. The whole cast is to say it's Flaboy it easy. It's Flaboy you have to vote for.
It is with much thanks and effort that we are here today to make this valuable donation to the fishermen of Ancillary. There are some over 30 boat owners in this community, and fishing, no doubt, is a very, very big part of the livelihood of the people of Ancillary. I want to, on behalf of the government of St. Lucia and myself, I want to donate this to the fishermen of Ancillary, and I am very happy, and I hope that you guys will put this into very good use.
On behalf of the Ancillary Fat Fishers, I would like to say thank you to Mr. Dominic Fede for providing us with a timely donation of the ropes we have here.
I want to say thank you to the minister for donating us that rope for the fad, and that's going to bring a little income during the COVID time, and I want to say thanks a lot again.
If I was Prime Minister,
that now go happen. That will never happen. You will never live to see that happen.
when President Trump lost his son, Joe Biden suspended his campaign.
That's true.
He suspended his campaign for 2 days when President Trump lost his son.
Oh, you lie! You lie!
I have it on the record. Lost his son.
Robert Trump, President Trump's younger brother, has passed away after an illness.
That's all, folks.
Crossfire, discussing the issues. Norbert Williams, Champagne, Dr. Secret, and Ring the Bell. Thursdays, 8 p.m. on Sky FM and GVD TV. Don't you miss it.
Bienvenue à sous Sky FM 93.1 et puis Dr. Sigray lundi pour vendredi. Ça c'est 4h30 pour 8h au soir. Côté Dr. Sigray ka encore nous. Côté nous ka discuter qui ça qui ka fait en pays. Nous aussi à sous Facebook et puis channel 115. Ça c'est GVD TV. Join moi lundi pour vendredi à sous Sky FM 93.1 et puis Dr. Sigwe en commun.
Bienvenue à sous Sky FM et puis Ring the Bell 93.1. Limo ici là c'est 45-6093. Moi ici là tous les jeudis, vendredis, samedi, 8h jusqu'à 10h soir. Moi aussi à sous GVD TV et puis Facebook Sky FM, matchez ça et puis Blamicol.
Family, Mamai Mikudno. Tune in to GVD TV 115 and Facebook Live this and every Tuesday for Let's Talk with Auntie Gail, where we will discuss what is happening in our constituency and the progress we have made so far. Anu pale epi Auntie Gail, Tule Madi asu GVD TV channel yon sek. Mikudno, we've got this. Let's talk. Nous tous, c'est yon famille à Mikudno.
Nom la fait bail.
My mother sent us back. It was out of his breakfast to give us something. Still with it.
Things were very difficult with my parents, and my mother opened a small bakery in the Castries area.
Because my father do everything he could do for me, not for himself, for me, personally. And from there, when I see my mom sometimes I just sit and I just remember my mother and my father every day, how they take it so hard to bring us up. And I seen from today there, I have two disabled children from mother. The mother asks for freedom, and they don't want that freedom, you know.
My